Hey everybody, this is Devin Francis, also known as Leonard Milsner.
And it's me,
Eh,
your friendly neighborhood Muriel.
I knew that's what you were going to do. And you're watching episode 119 of The Adventures in Odyssey Oddcast. Victoria, every time you watch Always Open, does Mariel remind you of yourself in the Oddcast?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I want a compilation of her saying that, of
Intercut
her
with you.
intros, and I also want a compilation of the people they have on the list that they hate.
Um, so what are we doing today, Victoria?
Today we are looking at the fourth Adventures Imagination Station Magic Treehouse book.
Yeah, we're finally back because shutdown's
It's
over,
called
so
Revenge of the Red Knight. I had to check.
yeah, we're finally back
Not
now
as
because
not as good as my Telemachus book.
Victoria is done working harder than I've ever worked in my life, so
I made more money than my dad for a good chunk of time.
worked 11 out of 10 days for 12-hour shifts consecutively.
10 out of 11 days.
Yeah, that's what I said.
No, it's not.
Okay, so Book 4 of the Imagination Station series, Revenge of the Red Knight, written by Marianne Herring and Paul McCusker, as always. What happens in this book, Victoria?
So, in this book, it opens right where it left off, like literally right where it left off. But first, we get this awkward summary,
As always.
as we always do,
Yeah.
with like 3-word sentences for 10 pages, no commas to be seen.
Oh, there's still the one, same one as last time.
Yeah, but that's in the note and it doesn't count. That's
No,
why I
no, no,
like
no.
Albert.
It's the one
He
where it's
uses
like
commas.
cousins, Patrick and Beth, blah, blah,
That
blah.
does not count.
Anyways,
That doesn't count.
pray continue, Mr. Walton.
Okay, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. So Patrick and Beth are sent back to medieval times and they meet this awesome guy. He's awesome because his name is James, and all the best characters are named James. So, this kid named James, who comes off a little rough at first, but he's like the best character in this book. So, he's the squire or something like that to this knight, and him and the knight are friends with Albert. So we get to meet Albert in this book. He's old.
Who's the knight?
I didn't think he'd be old. I can't remember the name.
He's Sir Andrew, and he is Albert's brother, which means that he's like Wit's super great uncle.
Yeah. Albert is old, and he looks like a Wit with like brown hair. And I don't know how to feel about that. I thought he'd be young.
No, I didn't think he'd be young.
I thought he'd be like a teen.
I picture him in my head like Merlin from The Sword in the Stone.
Okay. I mean, Merlin looks more like Wit, but okay. What are those Wit lookalikes?
Yeah, they're everywhere,
Doesn't sound
Victoria.
like Wit, though. They're everywhere.
Haven't you seen Shadow of a Doubt?
So yeah, it's basically like they find out that all the items they've been getting, they're giving to Albert because he's in charge of all these precious items and someone stole them, so they're accusing Albert of it or something like that. It was really convoluted. So then Albert's trying to like get them to take them back, but then the guy who stole the items in the first place is like, why are there 2 of all the items? I gotta double steal them now. And then there's like this jousting tournament, which that's not how jousting works in any way. They joust and then they get knocked off their horses. Then they start sword fighting. Sir Andrew doesn't have a sword. You're supposed to have a sword when you're jousting.
Why?
Because if you both fall off your horses, then you have to fight with your swords.
Are you
That's
supposed
how
to?
jousting works. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and Sir Andrew doesn't have a sword, and I'm like, what are you doing?
I mean,
and
in the book,
to,
they made it...
run and get him a sword, and he almost gets killed because he's an idiot, and he doesn't have a sword.
They made it clear in the book that it was not supposed to be a sword fight joust.
Well, they usually make it clear, but either way, so many rules were broken. That that would have been stopped back then. I can pretty confidently say they would have stopped that joust, because that was
Well, that was the whole point,
was
Victoria. They would have,
not.
but they didn't because they were cheating.
Yeah, everyone was cheating. It was a massacre to knightly law. I didn't like it.
Well, you've grasped the concept of the point of it, yes.
Anyway, then I kind of tuned out, but they trade rings with Albert. The ring that Wit gave Albert thinks that, like, if you wear the ring, you're Wit, so it does what you say, and that's why Wit can't go in the imagination station, because it thinks he's in the imagination station, which makes no sense whatsoever. Also, if this was an actual time machine, he would use it to go see, like, Jerry and Jenny and crap. He wouldn't use it to, like, go talk to his made-up relatives and exchange jewelry with them like it's some sort of white elephant gift exchange. It's so stupid. Okay, what else? What else is there?
Well, they're like, yeah, we solved all of the problems,
Yeah,
except
they're
then,
like, we solved all the problems
except then
forever, even though nothing's solved.
Hugh, who stole the treasures, he jumps out of a bush and he takes Wit's ring to summon the imagination station. Then he hops off in it and gallivants throughout history away.
Yeah, but Beth and Patrick end up somehow, they get back to Wit's End, regardless of not having the ring.
And then Wit's like, I'll create a program to track him through history where in time is Carmen Sandiego style.
Yeah, and it's like, why didn't you do that before?
Yeah, he didn't know it was the ring. He didn't realize that this is actually Bioshock Infinite, is exactly how the plot works.
Why didn't he try to track Albert before? If he can track random people.
Because it won't work for him, Victoria.
So stupid. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. Anyway, that's the book.
Yeah.
You know what it felt like to me? Is there such thing as having something feel like filler even though it advances the plot more than anything else that's happened so far? Because this felt like filler to me. And I don't know why, because it wrapped up so many story ends and it answered so many questions.
I do know what you mean.
But it was just, like, so boring.
Because I got to the end of the book and I was like, wait a minute, what? That was the whole story? Yeah, that was the whole plot? They had a joust? Like, I was like, I felt arc. Like we're, like, building up what's going to happen. There was a joust and then, oh, wait, that was the whole story.
Yeah, it had, like, no arc or anything. The other stories weren't that great, but at least they had, like, a clear arc.
Exactly. I feel like this book, by necessity, was too mired in exposition about the series to have room for anything else, and they talk about that here. I'm going to skip down to the notes from the guide about it. So there's two of them for this. This second one's less relevant, so I'll read that first, and then we'll get to the important one. So the first is, my take, Paul McCusker. The Imagination Station books are truly unique for me as a writer because the cover art and interior designs are usually needed before the book is actually finished. It's become an ongoing joke that we're writing stories to go with our covers rather than the other way around. I know this is very shocking to all of you. I almost got into historical trouble with Revenge of the Red Knight. I wanted the House of Lancaster, the Red Rose, to be the good guys, and the House of York, the White Rose, to be our bad guys, but we were already stuck with the cover and title. I wasn't happy about it until I realized that, historically, the War of the Roses was so long and politically complex that either side could be considered good or bad, depending on your point of view. Then it was easy to make the switch.
Alright then.
Yeah. It's like, well, that's probably not the ideal way to write historical drama. But, yeah. And then the more relevant to what you were just saying, cut scenes. In the first manuscript for Revenge of the Red Knight, we told the entire backstory of James the Squire. James was the son of Sheriff Giles, and the sheriff didn't want his son to be a squire. He wanted his son to work on the family farm and help feed his younger brothers and sisters. The book was far too long, and over a third of the story had to be scrapped, so James' backstory remains untold.
I mean, I like James regardless.
So the book was supposed to be about 50% longer, so...
Yeah, but that sounds like it was just backstory, so it wouldn't have really tied up anything anyway.
Well, maybe there was an arc for James then, I assume.
then the first half would have had an arc, and the second half wouldn't have had one.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, there was backstory for James that led into an arc that ended at the end of the joust or something like that. Then would have carried through the book. Maybe.
The end of the joust, he grabbed a sword and yelled for someone,
Well,
and that
they
was
probably
it.
changed it to remove it after they took it out. I don't know, Victoria.
Anyway,
So,
I don't think this one was very good. The Telemachus one is still my favorite, but I'm kind of biased towards that one.
From the top of the book, like you said, we have the prologue, which is as linguistically riveting and diverse as ever. It's almost the same word for word, but they added new info from the last book at the end, mostly to remind us that Wit either stupidly tried to mess up history by giving away his own family heirloom ring to his own ancestor, probably creating some sort of paradox juju in the process, or it's not real time travel, and Wit merely stupidly somehow gave away a real-life family heirloom piece of jewelry to a digital avatar of his own creation, like the world's worst dating sim. So, either way, Wit, you done goofed. There's no way to come out on top of this situation. So Patrick and Beth are in the cave. James is there. He's threatening them. They call down a legion of bats that swarm James, and he starts freaking out. So they just created the origin story for 15th century Batman. Now they just have to go murder his parents to seal the deal, and it'll be all done. So long, Scarlet Pimpernel.
I was surprised by how, like, intense James was at the beginning. He was like, hey, there's people in this cave, and they're like, who are you? And he's just like, I don't know. Who are you? I'm gonna murder you.
Okay.
And I was like,
Okay.
Biggest
plot twist of this entire story and the entire series. Lord Darkthorn isn't a bad guy. Was that jaw-droppingly shocking to you?
I wasn't paying attention. I totally forgot he was a thing.
They really got me with that when Sir Andrew was like, I am loyal to the house of Lord Darkthorn, and I serve him faithfully. And I was like, you got me with that one. That was a solid red herring to use, like, the worst edgy OC name in history, and then he wasn't actually the villain. You got me.
He's like the most evil name ever, and he's a good guy.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Speaking of Darkthorn, Wit's whole original, like, I left the remote behind in history angle really did not go how I thought it would. When Wit first mentioned it, I assumed that meant, like, oh, Lord Darkthorn has been using it to travel through history and steal treasures and stuff, and that Albert was, like, using it to, or that Albert had the remote and he was the one who was using it to save the kids as the knight or whatever, and then it turned out to be Andrew, not Albert. But apparently they just immediately smashed it with a hammer to find out what goodies laid within, and that had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, they're like, hey, where's the remote? And then James was like, the magic box? And they're like, yeah, the magic box. He's like, oh, we saw wires when we smashed it open to reveal what was inside. And I was like...
The story becomes more and more Isaac the Chivalrous with every page.
It does.
So, the way the letters have been appearing in the Imagination Station is they just put them on a rock, and then they just get sucked to the present when no one's there to watch them.
It reminded me of something in Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, and anyone who's read the book knows what I'm talking about with that love potion writing on the blanket. So stupid.
I mean, so they're like, after Wit left the 15th century, these treasures just started vanishing one by one. I was like, this just keeps getting weirder and weirder and weirder. Like, oh man, if we eventually find out that everything's actually normal and canon and Wit's actually been making up all this junk the whole time, that would have been amazing. Like, there was no actual...
It was just trolling them. What is, like, the biggest troll?
Yeah.
So, like...
It's like they've just been going on normal Imagination Station adventures all along, which just trying to fire at Beth and Patrick's imagination. I was like, the only thing I don't see how he could have bluffed is having the ring that's only visible when he's physically inside the station, even when it's not turned on.
It's called special effects.
I guess so.
It's called practical effects.
So we finally find out what's going on with Wit's ring. And I was like, so to be clear... We've got some sort of cockamamie Bioshock Infinite situation here, where Sir Elizabeth Albert Comstock has this ring which has been separated from where it should be, and that temporospatial discrepancy is allowing him to slip through time and space, just like the tip of Elizabeth's pinky. And this later confirmed it is indeed exactly the same thing, what's going on.
Yeah, Bioshock Infinite ripped off the Imagination Station book series.
It was the other way around, Victoria.
Oh, okay.
This came after.
Oh, that makes more
It
sense.
would make
That
more
would have
sense.
been funnier though if it was the other
It would
way
be
around.
pretty funny. Good job, 2K. Thank you, Ken Levine. um, so to be clear, so Lord Darkthorn, who's not evil, has not been using the Imagination Station to steal artifacts from history, also Carmen Sandiego style, but rather he is some sort of collector of historical antiquities of the highest order who already owned, he just happened to own all of these one of a
Yeah.
kind relics, like the crown of Cleopatra, the communion chalice of Aldrich the Barbarian. He happened to have all of these things without the help of the Imagination Station.
And he's like, I love how James so casually saw like the golden plate because you don't know who
The
he is at
tablet
that
of
point when
Kubla
he first
Khan,
sees it,
yeah.
and he's just like, "That's a golden tablet," and they're like, "Oh my gosh, is he gonna freak out?" And he was just like, "Give that to me. I'm supposed to take that somewhere."
And then Hugh, Master Hugh, goes and steals these things. James sends letters to Wit to return them, and the kids go back in maybe time to collect the original artifacts that presumably were supposed to have eventually ended up at Lord Darkthorn's castle by natural means. They've now corrupted the timeline by taking them directly there instead of them naturally going through time and ending up there,
And there's
resulting
two copies of
in two
everything
copies of
now.
each. However,
Uh,
the originals may become a paradox unless they're allowed to, unless they take the ones they stole from time and bring them back to their own time so they can later become the ones that Hugh stole. Now, this would be a bit of,
Hopefully this isn't real time travel, or else it's gonna result in butterfly effects that like destroy the entire
now
world, like the end of Life is Strange.
here's the interesting thing, Victoria, and you may have already pieced this together from my explanation. This would be a bit of a plot convenient stretch on time travel mechanics, but it would have been very interesting if it turned out that rather than Hugh stealing the artifacts, the reason they began disappearing from the castle in the first place was because Beth and Patrick had been swiping them from their proper places in history to retrieve them and bring them directly there in time, thus causing the originals to disappear in the first place, Back to the Future style. The photographs start to disappear. The issue, of
Mm.
course, this doesn't actually entirely work because the issue is if we work with a flexible timeline model, the treasures shouldn't disappear until after Beth and Patrick have stolen them, for as much meaning as after has in this context. And in an immutable predestination model, the treasures should have never been in the castle in the first place to disappear from, since Beth and Patrick would eventually take them. So the only answer would be some balance between the two, and it would be a whole messy nonsense model like Fairy Tale. And the only reason it was timed that way would be for sheer plot convenience, and no one wants that for a time travel story. That's not what happened here, but it would have been much more interesting, wouldn't it have?
I don't think any kid would understand that. I barely understand what you just said,
No,
but I also zoned out a bit.
wouldn't that have been so cool if that's what it was, though? It's like, oh, the reason they
Sure, I
started,
wasn't listening.
especially because they disappeared one by one. It's like, oh, they disappeared one by one because Beth and Patrick have been stealing them from history, and so they like didn't end up
I mean,
coming
it
to the
makes
castle in the
sense.
first place.
Makes more sense than the
The
things
order
it
in
was
which it
actually
happened
doing.
doesn't happen, but otherwise, it like I said, it's like Back to the Future. It's like, oh no, we changed it. Now I'm disappearing out of the photograph. That would have been.
Who do you think would be Marty McFly, Beth, or Patrick?
I guess it's both of them. And Wit
That's the wrong
is Doc Brown.
answer.
Is the answer James?
Yes, because he's the best character.
Yeah, so developed. Um,
He's more developed than Beth and Patrick are.
Name one character trait of James.
Name one of Beth or Patrick.
Patrick is reckless and Beth is smart because those are the two character traits they give to every male and female duo in any story like this ever. Thank you, Alex
They
Hirsch.
sound like Max and Annie.
Thank you, Alex Hirsch, for finally trying to subvert that trope for once.
With the guy being reckless and the girl being smart.
Yeah, no, he's like the always trope is that the girl has to be like the boy will be the crazy reckless one and the girl will be the
Yeah,
smart
that's
one
what
who's
I just
trying to
said.
get the person in line. And he wanted Mabel to be a girl who's allowed to be like reckless and silly, and the guy have to be the one keeping
I
her in
mean,
line.
that's mostly because they're based off of actual people.
Well, I know, but
too,
he's also talked about how he intentionally subverted that trope because it's the opposite in like every other piece of fiction that has like siblings or cousins or whatever in any resemblance of that sort of situation.
Every single time I think of Max and Annie, I can't really remember what they look like very much. I think Annie might look like, don't tell me, the girl with red hair from Clue Finders. Except for I just keep on thinking of like what's her face and Max from Dragon Tales,
Yeah,
and
that's
it's
pretty
like,
good.
why can't Dragon Tales do a crossover with Magic
I was
Treehouse? That
thinking
would have been
about
like the coolest freaking thing ever. That would have been the highlight of my
I
childhood.
was thinking about Clue Finders while I laid in bed last night. How timely. um,
I liked the guy with dark hair and the yellow hoodie. Is it
Owen,
yellow?
yeah, or Santiago.
No,
Yeah,
Santiago.
Owen had a
He was
green
my
shirt.
favorite.
Anyways, I'm glad that they were able to make Hugh feel like he was absolutely losing his mind seeing all these duplicates of literal one-of-a-kind artifacts popping up everywhere around him.
Maybe he started to wonder if like the ones he had were from a merchant and they were fake.
So it really felt like at the very last minute, I was like, oh, I guess that was the beginning of the War of the Roses smushed in there at the last second is what's going on, I guess. Like, and I'm drawing that purely just because on the first page in the book classification Library of Congress stuff, like it under the info, it has the book setting as the War of the Roses. Otherwise, I wouldn't have realized there's any kind of historical event tied to this at all. But I obviously don't know enough about British history.
The Lancaster, my ship.
So, like I said, they explain more about Wit's ring, and it turns out I was indeed correct. This is somewhat similar to Elizabeth Comstock's abilities in Bioshock Infinite. I hate that there's actually half an explanation for all this ridiculous nonsense. Also, given how Hugh has clearly been out of the loop on what's been going on regarding the duplicate treasures and all, how on earth did he come to the idea that it would be strategically wise for him to steal the ring, and then when the imagination station appears, instead of there's no shock or terror at the witchcraft before him, he just jumps in without any hesitation whatsoever? Where's the precedence or the eavesdropping that would lead him to think that he wasn't jumping to his doom? He had
I don't
no
know.
idea what's been going on, as evidenced by his shock over the duplicate treasures. So,
It sounds like he already thought he was crazy, so he's like, oh, might as well roll with it, and he just jumps in this giant machine.
yeah. And as you pointed out earlier, Wit's like, oh, I guess the imagination station doesn't work for me because I don't have my ring on and I'm literally unrecognizable without it. But for some reason, it's working fine for you children, even though you are also not me, nor do you have my ring. If you have to be on some sort of whitelist for the machine to work for you, it shouldn't have worked for Beth and Patrick, first off. Because if Wit doesn't have his ring, it should at least think he's just some random person at Wit's End, right? So why wouldn't it treat him like one? Maybe it wouldn't give him administrator privileges, but it should still work for him just like it does for Beth and Patrick. Which should just be as much an average stranger to the machine as they are. Also, why would your ring be taken by the imagination station as the one true indicator of your identity? Like, I mean, I know Mabel was perfectly content to think that literally anyone was Wit back in album 5, but was that really Wit's awful idea of a security measure for self-identification?
Fun fact, one time I dropped an earring in my car and I wasn't able to go in there for 3 years. It didn't recognize me if I tried to go in. I wasn't
Yeah.
able to get in.
I didn't realize you were telling a joke. I was super confused. Yeah, and it's weird. It's really weird. There's a sick,
Stupid.
there's a sick sort of logic to it all, but all in the most illogically logical sense. So, how would you summate your thoughts on it, Victoria?
This episode, not episode, this book. Oh, I kind of left it feeling the same way I did after the fourth movie for Odyssey. Just like empty. Like I didn't
Yeah.
get anything from it.
Yeah, I find it the most weird, like the whole historical angle to it, because I came out of it and I'm like, I didn't even realize that was supposed to be the War of the Roses, even though I read that on the first page before I started this story.
Like at least I can give the other books the fact that I actually kind of did learn some things
Yeah,
from
I was
them,
like, I feel
especially
like
the first one.
I learned
I learned nothing from
I was
this
like, I feel like I
at
learned
all.
nothing historically. Also, even less so now that I found out from the official guide that they had so little conviction on like who was even the good guys and the bad guys in that war that they switched it at the last minute just to match the title that had already been set for publishing.
Maybe they couldn't teach us anything historically because they didn't know anything historically either.
Yeah,
It
I
sounds
guess so.
like they just didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah.
All in all, this book kind of sounds like it was a mess behind the scenes putting it together, and it kind of shows. I think this is the worst book of the series so far.
Yeah, I'd give it the lowest rating. I'm gonna probably give it.
I don't know what I rated the other one.
I'm gonna give this one a 2 out of 5. I think they
I'm
tried
gonna give
to
it a 2
explain how
also.
this stuff came together, and some of it, there were a number of aspects of it were surprising. As I said, Lord Darkthorn was not getting these treasures through time travel. The remote did not play into anything whatsoever. Lord Darkthorn wasn't even an antagonist in the first place. It's it was weird, and I don't know if that means because so we're done the first arc now.
Yeah. I feel like we wouldn't be done the first arc because there's like Master Hugh still got away, and I feel
Well,
like
yeah,
so
it's
much
setting up the
is
next arc.
unresolved. I mean, like it feels like if it weren't for some aspects, like if Hugh didn't escape, I would think, oh, the first arc is done. But I feel like Hugh escaping is big enough to make it feel like the first arc isn't done.
Well, no, I mean, we know the structures of the stories is 4 books per arc, and if you look at the way the Magic Treehouse books worked, it was like
Wasn't that 5 though?
no, it was 3. Was it 4? It was 4. Yeah, it was 4.
Don't ask me.
Anyways, yeah, it was 4. For the Magic Treehouse books, the way it would work is like you'd have 4 books in a row, and they would all be a very similar sort of mission, slowly answering pieces of a question that would be kind of solved, answered in the last book. So in this case, it's like each time they're being told to go retrieve some historical artifact so that they can save Albert from Lord Darkthorn. And then in the last book, we see who we're hearing about. We learn who Albert is and Lord Darkthorn and why they're gathering the treasures. So that's answering all that question and what we've learned so far. That's why it's the end of the first arc. And it's just that Hugh escaping into history now is the inciting incident for the next arc, I would assume.
I know I've complained about the episodic format of the past books because I'm not really big on episodic formats in a series, except for I actually really missed it in this book. I feel like they needed
You wanted more pattern
it.
formulaicness?
It's like I don't really like the pattern formulaicness, but I feel like it kind of gave it an idea of what it wanted
Yeah,
to be
because this one felt
and
like
kept everything orderly, and this was just like it didn't even, I don't know if I'd say it felt all over the place. It felt like it didn't really know what it was doing, and then it was over really
yeah,
quickly.
exactly. This one it lacked the formulaicness, but instead of that, what we had with was like no standard basic plot structure at all. It was kind of like a whole bunch of exposition and then a sudden little peak drop and then more exposition at the end. So instead of
Yeah.
getting rid of formulaicness for a more dynamic plot structure, we switched it for basically no plot structure at all. And it was just kind of like a weird, rambly journey trying to get out as much exposition about the basic situation as we have. I assume the series in general is going to keep on returning to the Middle Ages here, to the 15th century, just like the Magic Treehouse books kept on returning to the 15th century to Morgan and Merlin.
Every single book, I always think like this can't possibly copy the Magic Treehouse anymore, and it does like 10 times more every single book, and I'm like,
I love that note that we read from the guide in the first one, where Paul was like, "We didn't copy the Magic Treehouse books because the Imagination Station existed beforehand." Or like, we're not saying the Imagination Station copies the series. We're saying that this book series is a carbon copy of that book series.
I really hope that we get to the point where we read a book and there's a typo and it just says like Jack instead of Patrick, or Annie instead of whatever her boring name
Beth?
is. Beth.
Yeah, that would be pretty funny. It's like, oh, oops, we forgot to edit this part of
Our characters are so bland, we forgot what their names are.
We've literally copy and pasted the book and just changed the names.
I mean, if they copied and pasted the book, it would be better.
And I was going to say we might not notice, except it might be more interesting.
Yeah. The Magic Treehouse books are so much better than this. I honestly...
I mean, when was the last time you read them, though, also?
Grade 7 or something like that. Yeah. I think I reread the first one. I was actually planning on, reading one per night or something like that at one point when I was in high school. Just to, check out the series again. Mm-hmm. Relive some nostalgia, but I only got through, the first book because I was so busy.
Sorry about the food processor in the kitchen.
That's okay. I didn't even know what that was. Yeah, I don't really think I would have liked these books very much as a kid.
Yeah. The point I was going to get to before about, I think we're going to keep coming back to this time period. I assume that all the arcs are still going to stay tied to, Albert and Andrew and stuff, which hopefully means every time we come back here, we're not going to need as much exposition each time subsequently as we did this time.
I hope so. I feel like...
That's my one solace in this.
Albert was so built up, and there wasn't really any payoff.
There was no payoff. There was no
in any aspect
payoff
of the series, which is really disappointing, especially since this is the final book in the arc. This should be the biggest book of all of them. Yeah. I feel like they peaked at book 2. And so, book 1 was okay. Book 2 was great. Book 3 was good.
3 did have a fight with giant eagles, or giant Dwayne The Rock Johnsons. So I'm just saying that so I can bring back my Photoshop from last time.
That was pretty awesome.
Thank you. That was one of the first ones I did.
I was talking about the eagles, but I guess your Photoshop was okay too. I can't even remember why we made that joke.
Sorry?
But I can't remember why we made it Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
Because they were rocks. Patrick was being carried by a rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hate to say I left this arc disappointed. That makes me sad.
You don't hate to say that at all.
Well, I mean, I didn't really have high hopes for this series, but I did hope it would get better.
Yeah.
And it got worse after it was starting to get better.
Well, as of what's out right now, I think we still have 13 books to catch up on, Victoria, so who knows where things could go. Or is it...
I could read all this series in an afternoon.
Or is it the 18th? It's either the 17th or 18th book that they're on right now. So, plenty still to go. Plenty still to go.
I hope Mary Pope Osborne sues them.
Okay.
No, I don't. I don't hope that. Focus doesn't need that.
So, what are we doing next time, Victoria? Oh, what was your number rating? Did you give your rating?
2 out of 5, just like you.
Okay. What are we doing next time?
I Slap Floor.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember what it's called.
Unfair Game.
Basketball. A Fair Game.
Unfair Game.
The OAC. An Unfair Game.
No, just Unfair Game. No article.
Unfair Game. The OAC episode of the month for... May? Okay. I started listening to the one for June today, and I got spoiled about stuff because I listened to it. Listening to the episode in general is a spoiler, so watch out.
Okay, so that's all for now. That's what we're doing next time. Until then, thank you for joining us on our side of the YouTube. I have been Devin Francis, also known as Leonard Melster.
And I'm still really tired from Shutdown.
And you have been watching the Adventures in Odyssey Oddcast.